And talking about oil, our first conversation is about energy transition. The Nigeria Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, NEITI, has said it would soon unveil a roadmap on Nigeria's engagements in the energy transition program to meet the federal government's target of net zero emission by year 2060. Well, joining us now to discuss this and other matters is Executive Secretary, NEITI, Mr. Oje Bonaya, joining us right there from our Abuja studio. Great to have you on the program, sir. Good morning.
Thank you very much. Good morning,
Yes.
Nigerians, and I thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, great to have you. So there's so much buzz about energy transition, globally and here in Nigeria. Please, what does energy transition mean for a country like Nigeria?
Thank you very much once again. I think your question is very fundamental in the sense that we hear energy transition, and many of us are unaware of the implications and what this means for our daily lives. Energy transition is simply a global plan at the moment, a global agenda to stop or phase out, completely the use of gas, the use of oil, the use of coal on allied commodities or products to generate energy. And this is already a plan that is being implemented around the world, especially in the most developed countries. In most developed countries, you see cars now being driven without fuel, and the cars, even manufacturing companies and households trying to be less dependent on the use of gas and on the use of coal, on the use of oil to generate energy or associated power. But for us in Nigeria, it has very huge implications. And the resource-rich nations, especially in the sub-Saharan Africa, that depend on gas, depend on importation, export of gas, oil, and coal to generate revenue, to fund their economy and shape their livelihoods. So those are the issues. So in simple terms, energy transition is the gradual movement, the gradual plan to stop the use of these commodities, oil, gas, and coal, for instance, which are the mainstay of most economies in developing countries, especially those countries like Nigeria that are resource endowed.
And we've seen African countries actually, talk about how it's not going to be easy for, Africa as a continent, to make this transition. But recently you released a statement on your agency's plans to engage, in the transition program. Can you share some insights into this plan?
Well, our plan is not going to be different from the plan already articulated and approved by our government, the Federal Executive Council. Federal government already has a plan. NEITI's first role was to quickly understand and review that plan in the context of the job we're doing as an agency with legitimate interest to implement transparency, accountability, and good governance of our natural resources, oil, gas, and mining specifically. And we think we have a very legitimate and very, very qualified interest on how Nigeria engages with energy transition, because we are already thinking about what will become of our economy at a time when there will be no use of oil. We can't export oil, we can't export gas. And then how do we generate revenue? What will happen to the very essence, the very contributions, the value contributions that these commodities are bringing to bear on our national economy at the moment? So we're glad when the Federal Executive Council approved a plan and was presented at a plan. But as an agency with specific mandate in this sector, we have a duty to study that plan. And our first observation was, yes, it's a plan, very broad plan, but then that plan needs to be castigated into contents in terms of a framework, specific guidelines. How do you define, how would that plan be implemented in terms of The economy, for instance, what will happen to the economy when energy transition becomes real? What will happen to jobs? What will happen to livelihoods? What will happen to employment? What will happen to environment? What will happen to our daily lives? And what will happen eventually even to the sector? So those are the kind of concerns that we needed to put into consideration when we reviewed that plan. That review of our country's energy transition plan is still in progress. And recently we had to engage some sector experts at a conference we had here in Abuja. We had co-hosted that event with the Natural Resource Governance Institute. This is a non-governmental organization that is well known based in the United States. And they brought them here to Abuja. We can't afford all of us going there. So we invited them, they came here, and we invited all our own experts who are based here in Nigeria, especially from our partners, the NNPC, the relevant oil and gas companies, who are experts, and from the universities, research institutions. We had a 2-day brainstorming session here in Abuja, and we came out with a very strong conviction that working with them, NEITI has the capacity to develop a roadmap that will define specifically what needs to be done to drive that plan that the Federal Executive Council has already provided.
Right.
And in the context of our discussion, we were able to identify what needs to be done, and that process has just started.
Right, and we're seeing how, firms and households are struggling with, rising cost of diesel at this point. Do you think Nigeria has a chance, to minimize the economic shocks from the energy transition? And what do you think the policymakers can do to, mitigate these shocks, and various risks associated with this energy transition?
Thank you very much. That's exactly the whole essence of our engagement with the plan that the government has unfolded. The government has done its own part, but as professionals in the industry, we needed to cascade this down to, first of all, identify specifically the roadmap we are trying to develop is one of our major or immediate response to the plan that government has unfolded. We have looked at the plan, but the plan still needs to answer certain questions. What kind of data will be used for Nigeria to plan ahead if we are to prepare for this transition between now and 2060? What kind of data? What kind of skills will be required? When we are no longer in a position to export oil, gas, and the coal and associated commodities that are now mainly the source of our revenue, what will happen to jobs? What will happen to the economy itself? Our roadmap are providing clear and concise answers to these issues. We are looking at how the kind of data that will be available for national planning. We're looking at the kind of skills. We're looking at the diversification of our economy, what will be required, what kind of information and data that national planning and development will be requiring and expecting, who is to supply those kind of information. And then what are the risks and the opportunities that will be available? We have to identify the risks, specify them, where those kind of risks are coming from, and then how do we minimize those risks? Then what are kind of opportunities that will be available? How do we also maximize those opportunities? And if risks and opportunities are equal or less, what do we do? So those kind of questions these are issues that most developed nations that have come to accept that energy transition is real have already put in place. Here in the developing countries, we usually wait for the last minute. That's why we are glad that our government has responded timely, early enough to unfold a plan. We are working to ensure that that plan is supported with evidence-based study. And under my leadership as Executive Secretary, I have already commissioned a study, which we are doing with our international partners based in Oslo, Norway. we have commissioned a study on energy transition. And that study will be able to identify and answer and respond concisely to some of these issues I've mentioned. And we're waiting for that study to be integrated into the roadmap that we are already engaging in. We have in plan to subject that roadmap to a national discussion, a national dialogue, sometime in September. Our own expectation will be that our roadmap will be a very handy and comprehensive document that will enable us to engage with the Ministry of Environment and all the relevant agencies that have already shown enormous interest on this, and ultimately to the government to help and shape their own focus. The kind of costs that will come to bear on this are some of the issues. So we think that the time is now and we have commenced.
Right. Okay, the time is now. And, talking about data, you mentioned data and information there. Do you think NEITI, have enough information, and data to lead to, an energy transition that would work, for Nigeria?
Well, for now, yes. Yes and no. What I mean is, as far as we are concerned, I'm not aware of any other agency in Nigeria today that has more data and information warehouse on extractive industry. I think NEITI is the leader when it comes to credible information and data on the oil, gas, and mining sector. We are now expanding this to what will happen when oil, gas, and mining are being phased out. What kind of data will be required to engage in energy transition? That's exactly why I said yes and no. And that is the whole essence of the study that we have commissioned. And that is the whole essence of the roadmap we're developing. By the time our roadmap is out, we will be able to answer specifically that we're set to supply all the necessary information and data that will help us drive the energy transition plan that the government has unfolded.
Right, I would be looking forward to that roadmap. But, this is quite a huge responsibility, and you need partners at this point with what you're doing at NEITI. Who are your partners right now?
We're working with our international development partners. We're working with the World Bank. We're also working with the Ministry of Environment, in particular, that have shown us enormous interest. We're working with the state oil company, the NNPC. We're working with all the subsidiaries in the oil and gas sector. We're working with the media. We're working with the civil society. We're working with experts, retired and serving in the oil and gas sector. We're also working with donors. I've explained to you that some of these capacity, the ones we don't have within, we're ready to draw from abroad. We've engaged consultants which are being funded and supported by our global partners, the Global Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative. They are funding part of it. And it's a Nigerian that we know has done enormous work both within and outside the country that is leading those experts that are working with us. And we are very confident that when the draft plan is ready, we will interrogate them with a national dialogue where experts will interrogate them. And then whatever comes out of that dialogue will help us to fine-tune the document. And when we are ready, we will seek audience to present this to our government to support the plan that they have already developed.
Quite interesting. And, with the war in Ukraine and, Russia limiting supply of natural gas to Europe, we've seen, Europe have to lean back to dirty alternatives, for their energy needs. It's looking like a big blow for the global transition plan.
Yes, those are the kind of risks we're talking about. And you can see that, for instance, the world is now trying to cut completely supply of gas from Russia. For Russia as a country, this was unexpected. Maybe, I'm not sure if they factored this into the fact before they engaged the war with Ukraine. It could happen to any country. I mean, war or something, natural disaster will be something you never expected. That's why it's always good to have a plan, evidence-based plan, backed with information and data to respond. But it seems to us that maybe Russia is also probably aware, but the whole Europe is coming together to say, oh, we cannot be funding the war in Ukraine by importing gas from Russia. That's one of the sanctions that have been imposed. So if you have a country that is not properly prepared for that kind of situation, then Iran, it becomes a very big problem for the citizens, for businesses, for jobs, for livelihoods, and all that. Same can happen when a country refuses or declines to prepare for energy transition. Yes, we're looking at 2060 for now, and we think 2060 is far. I remember when I were younger, we used to hear by the year 2000, by the year 2000. 2000 is already here. And some of the promises we say, oh, by the year 2000, we're not sure all of them materialized. So our country must learn from global trends because the world, they say, is a global village, but you have to do some work to be in that village. If you fold your hands and sit down and you say you are in a global village, the village will leave you and you live outside the village. So global transition is no longer an idea. It's now a reality because when you travel to the United States or around the world, most developed countries, you see cars that are driven now without fuel or gas. You see cars without drivers that are on there. Those are solar driven because by the time energy transition happens, nobody will be asking for oil or gas. They will be generating energy from wind and solar, which they consider more friendly to the environment. So our duty is to help and prepare our country for this time that will definitely come. Whether it is far by our estimation now or it is late, we have an agency like NEITI that is ready and willing and available and will have the requisite skills and knowledge to engage on these issues, working with our local partners. I've mentioned Ministry of Environment. They were at that conference and made very good presentation. I've also mentioned the State Oil Company. I've mentioned all the subsidiaries within the oil and gas industry. They are working with us, including companies that are doing business in Nigeria. But it is more of our interest as Nigerians and as a government to make sure that we have a plan in place. And that plan will now guide us on what needs to be done. And the earlier we start, the better.
The better. Right, and also there was a time, 2010 and 2020 looked like a very long time, so we shouldn't underestimate 2060. Thank you so much, Mr. Orji Ogbonnaya, Orji, Executive Secretary, NEITI. It was great having you on the program today.
Yes, I just need, with all humility, I'm Dr. Orji Ogbonnaya Orji.
Dr. Orji Ogbonnaya Orji.
Doctor. It's not an honorary doctorate degree, so I spent 12 years to earn it. So please,
yes.
Thank you very much.
My apologies, Doctor. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, now, so after the break, we look at wealth creation in times of recession risk. We're having that conversation next. Do stay with us. This is Business Morning.